Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name's Bree Houston, and I'm a project manager as well as form designer and Formotus specialist here at Qdabra. And today we're going to be sharing kind of an integrated scenario using DBXL Azure and Formotus and Office 365. So why are we choosing to kind of show this integrated scenario? Well, there's a few reasons for that. So data everywhere. And this is really kind of a play on, rain everywhere. We're in spring. We want to kind of play on spring with the cloud and kind of getting the new beginnings going, so to speak, spring cleaning, and to show, how we can take things that are in Office 365 and really extend them. So I think to start out, we need to point out what's good about Office 365. Since we have many new users who are adopting the 365 as their SharePoint platform, and we recognize the need to kind of help these users extend the compatibility on this platform and find different ways to leverage, especially InfoPath, within that scenario. So the cloud has many great benefits. Data file and syncing is one of the best. So you have your Office 365 suite that is synced directly with documents that may be deployed to your SharePoint. You can edit in SharePoint. You can edit in your client application. You can collaborate with those different applications with people on your team. So it's really a great space for that data file and syncing piece of it. And this really allows for better collaboration. And another big draw for people is that everything is hosted in the cloud. So this kind of takes away that on-prem hosting and the need for something to be localized. Everything kind of lives in a really contained manner away from your kind of individual install locally. But there are some limitations that we've found. So what are these limitations? Specifically, a 5,000 item limit. And this isn't a big deal for all users, but when we're getting to kind of high usage, on the traditional on-prem scenario, you can have a little bit of flexibility with the item limit, but in the cloud, we don't have that. So as you're reaching that 5,000 item limit, it's a time to pay attention to what's happening with your data. And then reporting on flat data from InfoPath has always been kind of an issue, whether you're on-prem, in the cloud. How do we get those repeating expense items in this scenario or other repeating data out to a flat reportable format? And then the last piece is the mobile access in the platform. So you have the ability to access your 365 install or account and access your forms in the browser, but the problem is it may not be optimized for that environment, which can kind of decrease the user experience. So what have we found? That the cloud can sometimes be a rainy place. Even though we really like it, there's some really great features. It tends to be a little bit drizzly at times. And of course, we're used to that in the Northwest. But is there a way that we can kind of lighten the drizzle, so to speak, and make some way for the sunshine to shine through and make our cloud kind of environment the most optimal to grow our spring garden and kind of flourish in that new application? So what to do about the not so great? Well, the first thing that you can do is watch your forms like a hawk for that 5,000 item limit. The problem there is that it can become kind of tedious, require a lot of maintenance. You're going to have to do something like archive old entries, whether it's a manual process or setting up some kind of workflow to automatically archive based on something like a status or a date, so to speak. But it's going to require some kind of modification. And the same goes for reporting on flat data from lists. So in InfoPath, if you have any reporting that you need to do on repeating items, you can use something like Camel, which is a method to kind of flatten your data and send it out to sync with a SharePoint list. The problem there can be that it gets a little bit complex to set up, and there's not very good ways to debug when something goes wrong. A much easier method is to use Q rules to map to those various lists. But again, it's going to require some kind of setup. And sometimes it's an easy setup, but we're still going to have that 5,000 item limit because we're within SharePoint. So when you reach that limit, what do you do? And then the last piece would be that your users can access the form from the browser, but the mobile support is not so great. So we're getting some growth in our nice kind of spring garden that is our Office 365 in the cloud, but it's still a little bit drizzly. We've got kind of a lake forming, and we still want to make it better. So how do we make it better? Using DBXL is going to be a web service that integrates your data with a SQL backend database. So this is going to allow you to insert more than 5,000 rows of data. It's going to allow you to use your data in various formats and kind of increase the reportability. And it's also going to allow you to, in this integrated scenario, use a platform that leverages mobile devices and specifically functions that are better kind of optimized for your user experience. It's going to allow you to easily flatten your data in the database, and you can publish your form to one location and submit data from both to the same place. It's going to require some kind of walkthrough, but only one publish, which is a really great kind of feature that you don't have multiple forms or XSNs living to kind of complete the same function. So what do we have planned for our demo today? This is really a diagram to show you the flow of how everything is set up with this integrated scenario. So we have our form that kind of lives in the cloud, and how do we access it? Well, the first way, and the traditional way, is going to be through Office 365 in the cloud. So we can open our form up, enter data, submit our data back to DBXL, which integrates with our SQL database, and then pull it back out into our 365 environment. The other way would be to open up in Formotus, fill out our form, and do what's called a double submit, which we actually do in 365 as well, and submit to both 365 and DBXL at the same time if your data you want your data to be able to be accessed from either place. And in either method, we're actually syncing our data back out to our SQL database. So without further ado, let's get into our demo, and I'm actually going to start within the Formotus application. So from here, you can see that I have my Formotus forms and all the forms installed. So if I go back to my menu, I navigate to my forms. There we are. And the one that I want to use for today's demo is called Expense Report Azure. So you can see by default, I'm going to open up in the application, and I have this nice kind of layout optimized for my mobile device. So I'm going to enter my report date. Let's call it today. My end date is today, and my start date. Let's go a little bit back. Give ourselves a nice window there. And we'll call it B1234. And our purpose is a spring celebration. Okay. So now we're going to enter some information and our support. There we are. So I'm just filling out this information as a user. And you can see that pretty easy to enter. And we'll use webinars, which you can reply to get more information on this scenario. And what I'm going to do here is actually switch to my expense. You can see I can now insert an expense, maybe for today, and we'll call it our, let's see, our expense is going to be spring food, and we'll call it meals, and there we go. So we can see that I'm using a sales tax here to calculate the sales tax included. And there's a little bit of a delay in my screen, so I'm waiting for it to just catch up as I'm demoing here. And there's a reason that we're using kind of the totals button logic. I'm also going to use my camera capture here, take a photo of my calendar here, and could be good for a receipt in this scenario. And I'm going to set the photo and then clear from above. So you can see I just have that one photo now, and I'm pretty much ready to submit my form. So as things are getting caught up here, I'm going to submit my draft, and that is kind of the out-of-box way that Formotus is going to submit, and we actually don't need a close event. Formotus does that all on its own, and we actually have this double submit as well. So my form is just submitting in the background, and next we'll take a look at it kind of syncing through DBXL. So now in the DAT, if I go back and I actually refresh, we should see my new entry populate there. So there's my spring celebration. I can actually open it right from DAT here. And you'll see that it's actually going to default to my view as the client application. And there's a few things there for credentials, so I won't get too into that today. But I can also go back to the browser here, and you can see my spring celebration line right there as well. So now I can open up my spring celebration right from the browser, and you can see all of my information here. If I wanted to insert a new expense, I could certainly do it here and make edits to my entry. Now, the second piece would be how we're actually submitting to DBXL and to the web service and actually querying our information back. So if I query my expense reports from the database and use this tab here, what you're going to see is all of my entries from the database. So you can see my expense code, the report date, purpose, and total. I could do the same thing if I wanted to report on all the items that have been submitted. The possibilities are really endless, but all of that data lives within SQL, and it allows us to create filtered queries, which is something that we can't necessarily do within path from a SharePoint list, especially when we get up to lots and lots of entries. It really makes a lot more sense to have that data living within a database. So now let's get into kind of the behind the scenes and how this all works and what some of the optimizations are for both the browser and the Formotus application, as well as kind of how we're configuring our DBXL side of things. So I'm going to go to my DAT right here, and what I'm going to do is actually navigate to my database tab. So this is my connection string at the top. So that's how I'm actually connecting to my SQL database. And you can see that I have several database tables here. And the one that we're querying back, you can see doc ID, end date, expense code, and the purpose. And so this is what we're displaying in our info path form and actually querying that information from the database. And you can see we could do the same thing with the items, with the manager, with the employee, and really simple to relate our columns to the node path within InfoPath, our InfoPath form. So that's that piece. Let's go take a look at our form in the designer. So here in the designer, you can see my default view. And on this query, that's how I'm getting my information back from the database. And you can see in my query string here that I'm querying the database Qdabra samples, QD expense report to pull back that information. So here's my nice layout, optimized for more of the browser experience. And then in Formotus, here's where we get into kind of the optimizations for both. So in this view, I've created called phone, and Formotus uses specifically named views to switch on form open. So I name my view what I want the opening path to be, and you can see my nice optimized layout. So one tip, especially for dates, is that there's a custom kind of Formotus icon, and by shortening that box by just a little bit, it all is retained within one line. you can see that I'm using a hide show and a specific form logic field called current tab, and you can see that it's camouflaged. And I do this in a couple of places. I did that also with our tax, sales tax that we were calculating, and you notice that in the total, it works a little bit better with an info path to use a default value to kind of auto recalculate. But in Formotus, because we don't have as many postbacks or kind of sendbacks to the browser, it's often referred to as a screen refresh, we have to use a button. And so we have all that logic also on a button so that the user can kind of see that recalculation within the application as they're filling out their form. And so how we go about camouflaging is actually pretty nifty. So we have just a plain text box for both of those items. And in this instance, I'm setting the text color to white and this to the same gray background, taking away the borders and also the background color. So it appears to be invisible to the user, but it's serving that functionality for the calculation, because in Formotus, our fields that we're leveraging within a view need to be present in the view for our calculations to fire. And this other technique is to allow us to insert a repeating image. So we have our Formotus camera capture control here, and you saw me use both the camera or choose from my library. And then I'm actually using some logic to set the photo in a repeating group and then clearing from the kind of camera capture control. So those are just a few optimizations that are really going to help when it comes to optimizing your form for both the browser and Formotus applications. One other thing to note is in our data connections. So with our data connections, we actually need a few different connections set up. So you can see the Formotus non-anonymous used credentials to submit to our web service. And so in that way, we have a little bit more kind of security requiring the credentials from our user. In the browser, we're actually using an anonymous method, and because we're violating cross-domain restrictions in 365, you can see the URL to our web service is different than our SharePoint site URL. We actually have to convert that data connection to a UDCX. So it's a universal data connection to go and access that submit in order to get our data into the web service. But in a few minutes, I'll talk about one thing that's coming in 3.0 that's really going to extend that functionality and change the way that we're submitting data from both. So again, just to recap what we went through in our demo, we had our form published from one location that we can access either from the cloud or our Formotus application, which we're sending data back to both our SharePoint deployment and our web service. We can then query and pull back information from our SQL Azure database through our web service to our instance on 365. And we can also do this into Formotus, but I just didn't get into that in the demo today. So what's our takeaway from today? Really that this is one technique for an integrated scenario, and there's definitely other scenarios that you could definitely come up with in this 365 environment, but this is kind of an idea to get you thinking about how you would want to change your 365 environment. And it also saves your users time. If they can enter their data from anywhere, you're really extending what they can do as far as accessibility and entry, and also making your life a little bit easier when it comes to reporting and being able to pull back certain pieces of information pretty easily through DBXL and the web service. And then also you're leveraging mobile device features. In this example, we use the camera capture control to leverage, the camera on our mobile device to capture a new image and use it within our InfoPath form. So if we think about it, we've taken this now kind of rainy cloud, but we're seeing the fruits of our labor and the kind of spring bloom that can come from the drizzle and kind of working with this O365 environment to really extend the functionality and get something great for all of our users as well as our reporting. So here's the wrap up. Essentially, there's new possibilities in the cloud. Right now, we're using an anonymous submit from the browser and an authenticated submit from Formotus. So keeping that submit secure from Formotus. But coming soon in DBXL, this is going to change. So we have an event receiver technology that's going to automatically sync your forms from SharePoint to DBXL without a submit data connection. So it takes away all that nasty submit logic, and we can actually just submit to our SharePoint library and sync our forms automatically to DBXL. So that's coming, and it'll be in a future webinar. There's also a feature to generate PDFs, which is going to be a really great kind of integration for people using DBXL to kind of auto-generate PDFs on submit. And this release is coming in June 2015, so keep your eyes and ears open. Our social media is one of the best ways to reach us and kind of see what's coming next in our product rollout. So follow @FormsQuo or InfoPathDev or Qdabra. Any one of those channels will keep you connected to what's coming next. Thank you very much for attending today's webinar, and we hope that you join us again soon. Thanks.